Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Behind Enemy Lines with Terry and Mike. So we have another very interesting guest. Actually, he was like one of the early adopters of CIA whistleblowing, intelligence whistleblowing. Pedro Orta from 2015 is when his story started, and then there was the beginning of his story. And then I think as all of us experienced what happened with Donald Trump. I was never a big deep state guy. Was never a big deep state guy. I also thought that people that were preppers were whack jobs. I did a 180 on all that stuff. I really did. I mean, a total 180. And so we're going to talk a little bit about his story in the very beginning, just to give you an update for those of you who didn't see the show last year. And then we're going to jump into some of the stuff that's around Obama, General Flynn, Clinton, Biden, all the craziness. I mean, it's all intertwined, right? And will anybody ever be punished? I don't know, but I'm glad to have you here, Pedro. Mike, do you want to? Do you want to say anything before we hand it off to Pedro and let him do his little intro?
No, no, let's go ahead and start there. And then we got a lot to talk about, both the new developments, the deep state. And what I'm most curious about is, are we going to see anybody actually prosecuted?
That's a great question, and yeah, let me get started here because it ties into what we're seeing today and whether or not we will see some prosecutions, people going to jail. Basically, my story in a nutshell. Try to keep it concise. I was sent to a war zone as a deputy chief of base, doing my job, reporting to the command. What I saw, what I witnessed firsthand, led to reprisals, as in personnel actions, which is against the law. If you report what you reasonably believe evidences violations of law, significant specific endangerment to public safety, fraud, waste, EEO matters, I witnessed them all. Uh, Working for a chief of base as a deputy chief of base, I was second in command. She was first in command, creating a hostile work environment, sending us out of the base for food, for yoga classes, endangering our lives during times in which rockets would impact, and a whole host of other issues, like not even meeting with the military for a week because we're too busy socializing.
What
Uh,
country was this in?
Afghanistan.
Yeah. Okay.
I was a deputy chief of base in Afghanistan. So I did my duty as far as reporting these issues, using the proper channels, the proper authorities. The next thing I know is I'm sent home short of tour. Basically, I'm being put through a runaround where every single office in the CIA, Equal Employment Opportunity, the IG, Human Resources, the grievance officer, nobody wanted to fix anything. And all I asked for is, fine, you don't want to send me back to Afghanistan? Just give me a compensatory job. That's all I'm asking for. Well, they basically chased me out of the CIA. And I landed in the Office of Inspector General for the Intelligence Community, where I took shelter under what's known as a joint duty assignment. And, after I got chased out of CIA, it's like all of a sudden now the CIA IG, 6 months later, it claims that they're going to start investigating. And 2 years later, it's a sham investigation. They wouldn't even talk to the witnesses. They wouldn't collect all the information. So to this day, I don't have finality on the investigation that was reportedly done 2 years after the fact. And in this mess, I end up going back to CIA, going back to another whole host of reprisals and all sorts of stuff. Now I'm blowing the whistle to the superiors at the CIA, at the DNI, Congress, Mike Pompeo, Daniel Coates, and nobody does anything. Nothing.
Well,
I make
well,
intelligence.
and
Sorry.
real quick, how long had you been in the CIA prior to this happening?
By the time I got to Afghanistan, I had already had 2 years of war zone experience in Iraq. I had another year of experience in Afghanistan. I had 2 years of other semi-quasi war zone experience in counterinsurgency in a hostile environment. And on top of that, I had another 7 months of war zone work. So I went out to Afghanistan in 2015 with almost 15 years of experience,
Yeah.
well prepared. So it's not like in distinguished history, 8 exceptional performance awards.
Hmm.
No complaints, never had a security violation, never had anything really negative.
Again, the kind of person we want doing that job, but then you make one complaint and nothing's done about it. And that's, again, part of the problem with this whole whistleblower system, because even with situations, issues, whatever you want to call it, like you dealt with, where it's not political, still nothing's being done. Is this just that they want to protect their leadership, or they don't want to ever admit fault, or is it some problem that runs deeper?
It's a problem that runs very, very deep. Tactic of tyrants. It is basically violations of law. They abuse their power to cover up their wrongdoing. They overclassify information so that people won't find out the truth. They'll spin the information, lie to Congress, tell Congress lies. They answer to no one. They basically take a molehill and turn it into a mountain. And then if you dare to escalate, they flip the script on you and call you the aggressor, and they gaslight you. And unfortunately, this happens because Congress allows them to do it. The whistleblower reprisal laws are beyond weak. They're basically just pretty ink on paper that is worthless, because I was able to have an attorney at one point in time, and a Administrative Procedure Act lawsuit was filed to try to compel the Inspector General to do their investigation. And the judge basically ruled in favor of the CIA, saying, I understand what you're trying to do here, but the law really has no teeth. We can't compel anybody to do anything about your case.
So I think I know the answer to this question before I ask it, but depending on who's in office, right? Democrat, Republican, whatever, the deep state and what you're experiencing, when you were in the CIA, and I think what we learned when Trump was in this is president, really doesn't matter. To your point, these guys do whatever the hell they want, right? No matter who's in office, correct?
No matter who's in office, you have an entrenched bureaucracy that has matured many, many decades. The CIA goes back to 1947. The FBI goes back to, I believe, it's 117 years old. They just celebrated their anniversary.
Yeah.
So we're talking about very mature bureaucracies that know how to manipulate presidents and know how to stonewall Congress. So the reality is that no matter whoever is in power, whether it's the White House or Congress, these agencies just know how to manipulate them.
Sorry, Terry, I thought you were about to...
Yeah, I lost my train of thought when I was going to say something there. Go ahead.
Well, obviously you've dealt with this for a long time, dealing with all these administrative issues, the effort to, cover things up, to not address the real problem and protect the people who are the real problem. And the fact that, again, like you said, this law is toothless. There's no real protection for people that do come forward and try to blow the whistle on, especially on legitimate problems. I'm good friends with this, Steve Friend and some of these other guys have come forward from the FBI. A lot of them are still fighting their battles there. Some of the things they did to people like Garrett O'Boyle are just plain dirty. But this is the game they play to kind of protect their interests, protect their narrative. Now you've been doing a lot of work also writing, and I've got a couple of your articles here from the Western Journal. Do you guys want to go ahead and get into these now, or do we want to anything else? Okay. Yeah, no, let's go ahead and pull this first one up then. So this was something that you'd sorry, I'm having issues getting it pulled up on my screen here. There it goes. So CIA veteran op-ed, Obama's Russia hoax caused massive damage to U.S. intelligence. Here's exactly how. Now, be honest, I have not had a chance to read this yet. He sent it over right before we went on air, but this is something I find really interesting. So do you think what kind of damage do you think this is going to do? Is this going to primarily be like credibility, or is this going to cause actual issues, or maybe even spark some changes now that we're starting to see the fallout from Russiagate?
There are numerous angles one can pursue on exactly what kind of damage was done. The article is heavy on one aspect of it, particularly the oversight aspect. Before the Russia hoax, we had somewhat of some type of effort to hold the intelligence community accountable. The Democrats, out of all people, it was the Democrats who led the charge in the 1970s with the Church Committee. Senator Frank Church, a Democrat. Throughout the years post-Church Committee, it was predominantly Democrats who always tried to rein in the abuses of the CIA, the FBI. You look at post 9/11, the CIA torture and rendition program. That particular program became notoriously scrutinized through a Democrat, a senator by the name of Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah.
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 So it's hard to believe, but yes, it was the Democrats who were trying to rein in the CIA, the FBI. So what happens here is, fast forward to 2016, 2017, Russia hoax. All of a sudden, the Democrats flipped.
Yeah.
They're no longer seeking to hold the intelligence community accountable. They're now covering for them, refusing to hold them accountable for anything, and empowering the intelligence community to commit the abuses they have committed. At the
Yes.
same time, there's another element here: the press.
Mhm.
The press had led the charge for decades to try to uncover, reveal, leak anything and everything that would basically undermine abuses of power by the CIA, the FBI.
Yeah.
They championed Edward Snowden, for example. They championed Ron Wyden and his efforts, another
Hmm.
Democratic senator, efforts to hold the NSA accountable for its violations of, U.S. citizens and personas information signals collection. But
Yes.
what happened is 2016, 2017, Russia hoax, the press flipped. They're now basically the guardians of the CIA and the FBI. They can do no wrong. And they were part of the leaking mechanism for the pro Russia narrative, as far as
Yes.
Russia being colluding with Trump. So that's the angle this article approaches. And that's extremely significant because historically, the Republicans have never been a guard dog as far as holding the intelligence community accountable. They've always been a lap dog,
Mhm.
Yeah.
giving the intelligence community whatever they want,
Yep.
covering for them, going as far as telling them, don't tell us what you're doing. We don't want to know. That way we have plausible deniability. I mean, if you go back to the 50s, you had
Yeah.
powerful Republican senators that actually empowered the CIA to commit the abuses of power they did with coups and financial matters in Central America and Iran and other places.
Yes.
Yeah, I think part of the pivot by the Democrats and the press was, I graduated high school in '79, and the people back then were being brainwashed at the universities, and the liberalism and the craziness, and as they started gaining more power within the government, within these agencies, right, and they're all kind of having cut from the same cloth. They figured they could weaponize. They had so many of them embedded, right? And they could weaponize the media, the intelligence community to keep gaining control and power. And I think a lot of that had an effect into why they did some of that pivoting. I don't know if you agree, Pedro, or not, but
It could be, but I mean, you've got to look at the historical facts for example, the Washington Post and New York Times led the charge with the Pentagon Papers. You know,
Yep.
Iran Contra,
mhm,
another instance where I mean, it was the press that hammered the Reagan administration over their Iran Contra issues, the Contra wars in Central America, and then the Iran weapons transfer that led to funding of the Contras in Central America. I mean, the press just historically hammered the CIA and the FBI. As far as the actual flip, if we were to really look at it, the key trigger was that Russia hoax, where all of a sudden, you know, President Trump was elected because the Russians intervened and helped him win. So now you've got the press basically siding with the intelligence community, which was being weaponized against President Trump. And
Yes.
to this day, the press refuses to acknowledge all the lies they pumped out,
mhm,
pretty much reinforcing the Russia hoax. And, if it wouldn't be for non traditional reporters like you, and some of the new persons that have arisen with the new entities, OANN,
Yeah.
Bannon's War Room, and others, Newsmax, forget it. We wouldn't even realize the reality of just how weaponized government power has become against not just President Trump, but U.S. citizens for that matter.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like,
I re- I think President Trump was kind of the he was the trigger point. You know, he was an outsider. He wasn't part of the good old boys club, and I think that's what sparked this new unity we see between our media, the intelligence services, and everyone else, because they saw him as a common enemy. It was also about solidifying power. They had their people in charge now, running the CIA, the FBI, everyone else. They were unified. We know that now, and at the time, these people were always kind of presented, not all of them, but most of them kind of presented as nonpartisan. They're people that are there to do their job. We know that's very different from reality now, but when you wind the clock back to 2016, 2017, I think that's what most people thought. And you're exactly right. We had the media unified behind the message, and we saw that accelerate as the years rolled forward. Bring in 2020, the Hunter Biden laptop. They were literally taking directives from our intelligence services and then passing those off as legitimate news, discrediting the laptop. And this was all an effort to suppress the truth, to try to sneak Joe Biden's corpse into the Oval Office. But now, and that's kind of why I feel like now it's this weird battle that we see right now between the media trying to ignore the lies they told for the last 4 years, pretend this is nothing. But I don't really think they're going to be able to do that for long now, I guess my first question is, do you think we'll actually see prosecutions now that more and more facts and details are coming out, and these have already been handed off to the DOJ for criminal referrals and indictments? Personally, I think it's going to be hard to charge Obama, but I think everybody else, it sounds like they've got them dead to rights. Do you think this stuff is going to stick, or are we going to see slaps on the wrists and very little justice over this?
This is a very difficult task for the strike force looking at this matter for the Department of Justice. I mean, first, Obama, as president, has presidential immunity. Some claim he doesn't have immunity. The reality is that the Supreme Court ruling that exonerated President Trump heavily weighs in as far as whether or not President Obama could be charged. And now, if President Obama was the ringleader issuing orders, the question is he willing to take the hit for the others? Since he's got immunity and they can't do nothing to him, all the others can basically point the finger at Obama saying, hey, I was just following orders. So I'm following presidential immune orders. But that's a serious challenge. Treason, it's certainly not. The Constitution defines treason. And treason is specifically defined as an act during a time of war that aids and abets an enemy. So this is not treason. So the people that are calling this treason are misinformed. The conspiracy against rights is probably the most significant law, and it's a law that I believe carries just a fine and maybe a certain term limit as far as imprisonment. And as far as proving that it is a conspiracy against rights, it might be relatively easy, but again, the charges need to stick pending as far as whether there is presidential immunity or not.
they
And
should hit him
even
with
if you're
RICO.
able to indict, where are you going to indict these individuals?
Yeah.
Because if you indict in the District Court of D.C.,
Yeah.
or for that matter, the Eastern District of Northern Virginia, these are very, very liberal areas of the country that we saw what happened with the Durham trials. We had an individual from the FBI who had clearly lied, had clearly broken the law, and the juror said, we don't care. He's not guilty in our eyes, and let him go scot-free.
Pedro, can they do maybe some sort of conspiracy or use the old mob theory in RICO that they're all working together to, go against the citizens of the United States in some form or fashion in all these different channels that they were trying to change the outcome of the election, or is that just far-fetched?
Well, I mean, there are other challenges here. Okay, we have to realize that whatever actions the Trump administration takes will set precedent for future administrations. So it's going to have to be a really, really tight case that meets the statutes of the law and that can actually be brought before a judge without a judge throwing it out.
Yeah.
Or for that matter, a jury basically throwing it out, even if they're able to change the venue. Because the moment you cross that line, throwing it out. Because that prosecutor administration.
Oh, Pedro might have froze there for a second.
By that,
Yeah,
Okay, you're back. Sorry, you froze for a second.
okay, the moment you cross the line of a presidential administration taking the initiative to take some kind of court action against significant actors from a previous presidential administration, now you run the risk that future presidential administrations may take the same actions. For example, let me give you a perfect example. Let's say it's 2029, a Democrat comes in, and he comes in a retribution tour to take vengeance against Trump administration officials. And now they start weaponizing the law, looking for anything they can possibly find to start charging Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Ratcliffe, Tulsi Gabbard, so forth. And now you have a serious issue here, a serious escalation, where one administration had taken legal action against a previous presidential administration. So the next presidential administration starts taking action against the previous presidential administration. So
So
that's why it
yeah,
has to be.
I got a question for you then. What do you think is more dangerous? Taking action as we just discussed, but truthful action or inaction because of your concerns of what you just mentioned. I think it's more dangerous to have inaction and then let the next group come in and say, "What the hell? They got away with it. Obama got away with it."
Let me add one thing to that too, because I would argue they've already weaponized the government. This is exactly what we saw both in 2017 and even all the way through this last campaign from in 2020, and then again in the lead up in 2024. They've prosecuted Trump. They've even prosecuted his attorneys. They even tried having a lot of them disbarred. In Georgia, they even wrapped up people in that RICO case that had nothing to do with it, had no interaction with the administration whatsoever, like Pastor Lee.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I would argue they've already weaponized the judicial system. That if this isn't stamped out, if the message isn't sent, that we will see escalation. I don't think they're going to have a lot of luck getting in 2029. I think they're probably looking at least an 8-year hiatus from the White House. At least they may be able to take back Congress. We'll see what happens there. But to me, conspiracy against rights, that's 10 years in jail. I looked up the statutes for it. So it is some pretty hefty fines and up to 10 years in jail. I know they're already talking about moving to the venue, tying it to the raid at Mar-a-Lago, and then using the district court down there in Florida. Sorry, I don't remember what number that is, but yeah, moving it down there where we're going to have more likely to have a friendly judges, friendly jury, and centered around that. At least that's one possibility that I've heard. But it seems like there's a number of other violations of the law that I've seen throughout this whole thing or seen suggested, and that's not even getting into all the other crimes lying to Congress, which could also be tied to this. Like we know for a fact that each of the people mentioned lied to Congress, lied under oath. And if you make this a conspiracy charge, then you can roll those in even if the statute of limitations had expired.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I brought up the conspiracy in the RICO Act too is that if you look back in organized crime or drug cartels or whatever, and you have the conspiracy to your point, Mar-a-Lago in Florida, right? So yeah, the heart of all these crimes, treason, have been in DC, right? But a lot of these other individuals, these players, were different parts of the country, and you try to tie them into a crime that occurred like in Mar-a-Lago or some other some other district and do exactly what the Democrats do. And to your point, Pedro, is like we don't want to set a precedent of you know, doing what the Democrats did, all these bullshit crimes, right? Those were awful. We know they were awful. So if the Trump administration does something, it's got to be really viable and justifiable. That what I mean, it's got to be
Exactly.
solid. And then if they don't do anything, I think we're at a greater risk. I really, and I'm not saying that because I'm on the side this time. We just can't let them get away with it, and the whole country is worried that they're going to get a slap on the wrist when they changed the trajectory of our election, the world. I'm glad it turned out the way it did because I really don't believe that I believe if Trump won back to back, we would never have these changes and outcomes we're experiencing now, right? He would have been too concerned, right? He would have the rhinos would have pushed back. He wouldn't have the rest of the country didn't see what we saw in that those 4 years between his presidency to say, you know what? Wow, these people overreached.
Yeah, the priority is ensuring that it's done right so that the weaponization of power is now not coming upon Trump and the
Mhm.
Republicans doing the same tactics. That's critical. But the other component of this is, you're right, there's been the weaponization of power. So to me, the greatest issue here isn't necessarily exacting retribution or accountability. It's fixing these institutions so that this power cannot be abused again. Because the way
Agreed.
politics works, at some point in time, the Democrats will probably win the White House. Sadly, it's the reality. I mean, the reality is most people don't realize that, you know, even though Trump won, got every single swing state, over 300 electoral votes, it was still a very close election.
Yes.
Arguments can be made that what propelled him to victory was what happened after the assassination attempt, in which Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I believe Joe Rogan, and a few others, Dana White, people came together, and that was enough to put over the finish line for Trump to win. So my
Mhm.
point is that precedents that we set now can set the stage for even further abuses of government power and when the Democrats take over, should they do so. And on top of that, if we don't fix these institutions, which is the greater problem, we
Mhm.
will allow these institutions to remain in place to be abused again.
Yeah,
Agreed.
the reasons that you said that Trump won, Elon Musk and Kennedy and Tulsi, and I truly believe that that helped. Um, we have to understand every single election. I think we all know that is that the Democrats have their media machine, right? And like I've done a bunch of interviews with the New Federal State of China, Epoch Times, NTD, all the the Chinese outlets and stuff. And I know a number of times when I did interviews, I said that I believe you have the Chinese government controlled media, right? North Korea or Russia or whatever, right? And I believe the people in those countries know that there is a biased twist towards the government, right? They know that because they live there, they experience it, and they have common sense and knowledge. What I perceive as more dangerous is the American media. The
Yes.
reason I think the American media is more dangerous is that we're in America the free, home of the free and the brave, right? The media is not supposed to be biased. So many of these idiots out there that just watch CNN or MSNBC or where I grew up when I was a Democrat, and they just watch that and they think, oh, wow, well, this is all true. It's not true. They're being controlled by the Democrats without a doubt. I mean, you'll turn between MSNBC, CNN, they're all using the same keywords at the
Oh
same
yeah.
time. I mean, it's all and they're
Yeah.
using Democratic talking points. Therefore, people that are uninformed, stupid, forget about the ones that are purposely ruining our country. They know what's going on. It's the other idiots that see and watch it like, oh wow, this is the media's it's got to be true, and that makes it more dangerous because they give this perceived notion that they're not biased.
And the biggest danger is that nexus between the liberal media and government, where we saw what happened in 2021 with the censorship. And
Yes.
now that can be done again if
Mhm.
a lot of these government entities are not reformed and changed so that we can protect ourselves from a future situation where if Democrats take over, they weaponize again government power to shut down the individual media sites like ourselves, and for
Mhm.
that matter, the conservative voices like Newsmax,
Mhm.
OANN, and so forth.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have a Democrat that's running for governor in Illinois. He's running in the Republican primary. He's backed by the Democrats, and I've been one of the most vocal like, attacks on Pritzker and confrontation, the FOIAs, and all that stuff. And so this Democrat that's running in the Republican primary got all his little followers to mass report me on Facebook over and over and over. I got taken down because of them making these fake reports, trying to in a small little microcosm of Illinois take me off of Facebook. There's a lot of older voters too, on like Twitter and stuff like that, and a lot of people in Illinois are connected on Facebook. So these guys did a coordinated effort to take me off of Facebook.
That brings up the point that most people don't realize just how coordinated, disciplined, for that matter, relentless the Democrats and the Democratic machine are
Yeah.
as far as their agenda and their operatives to shut us down and to combat basically anything and everything that has to do with the Republicans, with the mega movement, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, and to your point too, we had the Twitter files that exposed a lot of this, that our government and intelligence services were reaching directly out to Facebook and Twitter before Elon Musk took over, and essentially getting them to either censor people or to give their message more legs and suppress any opposition. And look at what's going on in the UK right now with this Online Safety Act, where it was sold to the people as a way to prevent children from accessing pornographic material online, requiring age and ID. But now this is a way to block messaging against people that are starting to stand up against the invasion that they've dealt with for the last 4 years, the Islamification of Europe. And where that's gotten worse and worse. Now you can't find the post. They have no voice. Now the people are getting upset about that. There's been a lot of pushback, but we haven't seen a lot here because none of them can access forums where they can actually voice their opinions, or if they are putting stuff out, it's not being seen by anyone. It's essentially just being censored by the British government. And we could have something like that implemented here. Now, I do want to give one piece of good news here, because I do think this last election, we've seen a massive fall off in viewership for all of the mainstream media and less users on Facebook. We've seen a lot of other companies either soften or reverse policies, and not to a point where I'm happy with it. Like YouTube still hates my guts, and so do a lot of other places. But right. It's better than it was. But the big advantage is I think this last election was so lopsided in the media that when you have Trump getting 89% of the coverage on him is negative, well, Kamala Harris is getting 92% positive coverage by all the mainstream media, that people in the middle woke up. Because anybody knows, when you see that and it's constant, it's not one day of lopsided coverage because Trump said something dumb and somehow Kamala Harris showed up sober and looked like a genius. When it's every single day, people start to know, this is fishy. Something's not right about this. And that's why we've seen this fall off in viewership. CNN is down 40%. MSNBC is down almost 60%. The Washington Post and clicks and viewership and physical delivery, they're down almost 90% over the last year from what their reach was. So this is something that the alternative media is growing, but we are going to see a concerted effort from the left, the uniparty, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, to regain their foothold in media. They've already talked about doing manosphere podcasts and just sticking to health issues. And then once the election comes around, having these podcasters or hosts that they control all of a sudden start backing the left, because the idea is you don't need to peel off very many people, but you peel off 5% of Trump's support, suddenly that flips 15 states. I mean, we got to remember, some of these states were only won by a little over 10,000 votes. So this, like you said, this is a razor's edge.
Yeah, and going forward, the way American politics works, midterm elections, typically the opposing party is extremely motivated to drive out voters to vote in mass. And the ruling party, typically the voters are apathetic, lethargic, and complacent and just don't show up. Yeah. And if you look at the primaries, what happened back in 2022, 2024, I heard atrocious levels of turnout for voters. I think South Carolina had a primary with 7% turnout. Okay. Yeah. Here in Oklahoma, I had instances of maybe 10, 12% turnout. I heard somebody say in Chicago, they had basically almost 10%, whatever it was. So we're not going to win this battle if we do not maintain the momentum. We have got to step it up, step our game up, hit the accelerator to the floor and just keep cruising forward at maximum speed.
Yeah, in Chicago, the 10% turnout they had, you got to keep in mind, 5% of the 10% were dead.
Yeah, it was just from the cemetery vote alone.
Shut this. I got another question to you about the intelligence. Sorry, my Ring camera is going off here. You see this a little bit sometimes with the Democrats, but mostly with the Republicans, with Trump or somebody on his administration. I just saw it this week. I always flip through CNN and that stuff. I like to watch my enemy, right?
Yeah,
and they say, how dare Trump? Does he know what he's doing? He's challenging the intelligence agency, right? And you hear that on the news from time to time, right? How they're criticizing a politician to question the intelligence agency, right? It shouldn't be like that, right, Pedro? It shouldn't be like you want to say so. Oh, and these politicians like the left are bragging about it, like, well, it's your problem for you should never even think about questioning them. It's like, are you serious?
I mean, the intelligence community, how powerful are they is the question. Uh, all right, CIA. There's only three presidentially appointed, Senate confirmed positions. Okay. The DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, I believe you've got maybe 405. The Office of General Counsel, the National Counterterrorism Center, the Director of National Intelligence, the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. My point is very simple. Bureaucrats run these agencies.
Yes.
Bureaucrats who have been there for many years. By the time you become a senior executive, senior intelligence service officer in the CIA and the DNI, I mean, typically you're looking close to 20 years, 30 years. Uh, for the most part, given our historical context as far as how, the past since 1992 to 2000, Clinton, Bush and Cheney, unfortunately, the 9/11 caused serious problems where it just basically flipped the switch on these agencies, bringing in just vast amount of personnel. Then you
Yes.
follow it with Obama, 8 years. So by the time Trump came in 2016, you really have had almost 20 plus years of
Mhm.
either Democratic type operatives or Democratic leaning individuals taking the reins of power in these institutions. So these institutions became very liberal minded, liberal focused, Democratic leaning, as we saw.
Mhm.
And compound that with the lack of congressional oversight. The Senate Select Committee of Intelligence, the House Permanent Select Committee of Intelligence, pretty much give them what they want. That's another issue in itself. You got
Yes.
to look also the fact the staffers for these agencies, not these agencies, but these committees. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
staffers for these committees, their clearances are subjected to review by these agencies. So if these agencies do not want someone hired to do oversight, they can stop it.
Yeah. They'll find a
Yeah,
reason.
exactly. So the lack of congressional oversight, the long-term employment history of Democratic leaning type operatives in charge of these institutions, the lack of an ability of a president to appoint people into these agencies, or for that matter, for the president's leaders to come in and appoint individuals into these organizations, causes a lot of management upward.
Mhm.
Most of these leaders are basically extremely busy with either briefings,
Yeah.
with protocol, dignitaries visiting. So they're extremely dependent on the career service bureaucrats to run these agencies and, for that matter, to manage upward.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to dismantle and reform these agencies given the current models.
So you made me think of another question as I'm listening to you. There's so many people on our side that are, like with Trump when he got inaugurated, then he had to put his people in there. Oh, we want indictments, right? They want charges, right? Within months. And my response to these people is, yeah, we'd like to get the charges, the indictments and stuff. But when they come into these positions in the Department of Justice and CIA and FBI or whatever, they have to clean house of these bureaucrats that you right? I mean, it doesn't you just don't come in and all of a sudden Trump's the president in January. Oh, everything's fixed, right? He's got to put his people in. They've got to get appointed. They got to go through all that bullshit. Then they got to get in. They got to get situated and understand, right? And they probably in some cases know who's who, but you just don't come in and in some cases you go get rid of Comeys and guys like that. But that takes time. And then if you're going to start an investigation, to your point earlier, Pedro, is you got to make sure it's thorough, right? And you don't want to come in and do something half-assed, right? Because people want to go quickly and they want to see, some blood. You got to make sure you got the right people, the right trusted people to do the right thing, and that doesn't happen overnight. Do you agree, being that you came from that background?
Absolutely. And you've got to combat the internal sabotage. You've got also, records that are being hidden from you. You've got all sorts of issues trying to uncover the truth. You've got people lying to you. You've got people manipulating you. Uh, it's a very tough act to follow, and it has to be done right, as you were
Mhm.
saying, because if you don't do it right, eventually, you know, a poor indictment
Yeah,
will lead to basically an acquittal.
yeah,
So then
Yeah.
there's no justice. And then the double jeopardy issue is you can't charge them again.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So if you flub it the first time, you don't get a second bite at the apple. But both you guys are exactly right. Like the real power of the deep state is all the bureaucrats, these people that are loyal to a cause or a political party or a narrative, a direction for the country to go. That it's all their little minions that embed in every agency and make up the bulk of the personnel there. The ones that are just even just somebody that's a paper pusher, they have a lot more ability to screw things up and make things difficult than I think most people realized until the last few years. Now that we've seen all these meltdowns from various government employees as they've been exposed or pushed out, or I guess really exposed is the main thing, that either they weren't doing their job, they weren't doing anything, they were just collecting a paycheck while they were sitting at home, or they were directly involved with preventing Trump's agenda from moving forward. I think people have become more aware of where the problem is, that people don't join government and work in government, whether that's in an intelligence agency or at the FDA or wherever, just to do a job. It used to be, you were working for the federal government, you were going to take a little bit of a pay cut from what you made in the private sector, but the trade-off there was job security. But you were there to do a job. You were there to be a bureaucrat, to push paperwork. That the political wins were not supposed to affect whether or not you did your job, or whether or not you leaked things to the press or did other things to try to prevent things from happening to coincide with your political agenda. But that's really, I think, the big thing that's been exposed. And I don't know if there's easy measures that we can put in place to prevent a lot of that. Is anything short of loyalty tests, or I guess they're getting upset about all the polygraphs now. But I don't know what else we do to solve that problem. But I do feel like, one thing, like, again, if I were at the DOJ, I'd start with the low-hanging fruit. We have numerous contempt of Congress charges, like I mentioned, where they directly lied during those first couple years where they were propagating this Russiagate hoax, using that as the reason to continue all these investigations into not just Trump, but remember, they violated the rights of other people around him, from George Papadopoulos and many others. But bringing them in, we got to fight like the left does. So again, if I were making the rules, I would hit them on the easy stuff first. That way they're already spending money. They're already having to show up in court. It's been a huge inconvenience to them. And at some point, they're going to be jailed for the maximum of 7 years now for contempt of Congress. So we got to take pieces off the board as we can, which means we need to fight aggressively. So some of these like open and shut contempt of Congress cases, I would get them all on those first, then we'll start worrying about other charges and just pile on to them until eventually one of them breaks, or all of them break, and they either start talking and pointing to the other people, their co-conspirators, or we've got enough evidence to just lock them all up for the rest of their lives and not have to worry about them again. Maybe send a message, and hopefully this kind of thing does not happen again.
Mike, how dare you criticize civil servants? How dare you? Their blood, sweat, and tears, and they sacrifice for us. So you can't even criticize them. They're lifelong nonpartisan civil servants. They sacrifice.
Well, they can go to their cry closets and whine about it. I don't really care.
You see the left saying that all the time now, and it pisses me off, man.
Yeah, it reminds me of every year we would have training, the Hatch Act, how we can't basically endorse or side with any political candidate at any time. You could donate, but that's about the only thing you can do. But on your argument as far as start low and work your way up, that brings up a valid point. If you start with the lower level ones and work your way up, that potentially eliminates the top-down approach that opens up a defense of presidential immunity for everyone following presidential orders. So that's a scenario that, may be well worth investigating to see if, they can actually take some actions there. Now, one challenge that I see here is there's been so many crimes committed that I'm not too sure that they have the resources to investigate all these crimes and try all these crimes, while at the same time they're trying to fight the deep state and all the illegal court actions and all the little groups out there, action groups, political action groups, and so forth, filing lawsuits against the Trump administration. They're just completely overwhelmed with so much legal action that, that's one potential action that the left is doing. Just swamp them with so much legal work that they don't have time to charge us.
And that is actually true, which is kind of crazy. With Tulsi Gabbard, and you're probably following that more in the deep, they're talking about the weaponization of law enforcement, right, against Trump and Flynn. Tulsi Gabbard and her family were quad-assed, right? You guys remember that story? And
Yes.
he was very angry and upset. Are either of you familiar? Are they doing anything to go after the deep state, the weaponization of the Department of Justice for people like myself, right, Mike? I don't know if you have available
Y-
that FOIA that I got. So for those of you
Yeah.
people, I'm nobody, right? And I was put on a domestic terrorist watch list for either peacefully attending January 6th with a police officer buddy. This was 2 years after January 6th, by the way, or being one of the most vocal school board parents, in my area, where they had police officers from two police departments in riot gear. They're opposing pornography, Pedro, and so I was, Southern Poverty Law Center, who's works with the FBI. I think most of us know that, right? And they're collaborating with the FBI. And after a story came out 2 weeks later, I'm a domestic terrorist. I was labeled a domestic terrorist 2 years afterwards. And then Matt Gaetz read one of the stories in Epoch Times, reached out, had his attorney reached out to me. He sent a letter to Garland Ray Mayorkas in my behalf, wanting to know, why did you do this to me? To him, because I was a peacefully attended January 6th, or I was a school board parent. They acknowledged receipt of the letter, but they never said, "Hey, yeah, I did it because he did X, Y, and Z." I didn't, even all these years later. I didn't do anything wrong, right? I had the FBI show up at my house. FBI showed up at my house about Antifa, but they said, "Oh, by the way, we know you were at January 6th." I'm like, "Okay, then I didn't do anything." I didn't do it. I didn't. And then I ran FOIAs in May of myself. That's what Mike had up there, was the FOIA.
Yeah, I'll
And
throw it back up.
yeah, so I was curious. I ran a FOIA from like 2021 to last May. And I don't know if you could see it, I don't have my glasses on. I had 343 pages came back on the FOIAs. FBI, only FBI FOIAs from when I was 60 years old, right? I didn't do anything wrong for 35 years. 343 pages. And what's more agitating is that I wanted to see these FOIAs and what the hell they're about, right? And then they got back to me and says, "Well, it'll take 44 months to give you those 343 pages." 44 months. But if you go under 50 pages, we could get you those 50 pages. The first 50 pages, we'll give them to you in 9 months. The hell is that about? They want to keep prolonging it to different administrations or something? I don't understand. It makes no sense that I even have any FOIAs on the FBI. 35 years ago, I got in big trouble working with Chicago guys. And I FOIA myself 10 years after that, just curious. And stuff came up on DA and ATF FOIAs, right? But like not even like maybe 20 pages. And this is a like highly involved
Huh.
case. And
Yeah.
now at 60 years old, 342, I haven't done anything wrong in 35 years, I swear to God. So I'm just kind of shocked. This is a perfect example. I know, Matt Gaetz, when he's not in office anymore, and they were supposed to have parents come in that were, the weaponization of the Department of Justice against parents like myself. I don't know if it's because I was a parent or I peacefully attended January 6th, but I'd like to know who the hell had the authority to label me a domestic terrorist. And then after Matt Gaetz and Troy Neal sent letters defending me, who the hell had the authority to just flip a switch and I'm no longer a domestic terrorist because congressmen reached out to them? It shouldn't be that easy to make me a domestic terrorist. It shouldn't be that easy to take me off of the list as a domestic terrorist. And then my last statement is, I'm pissed off at these Democrats that are bitching and whining about these illegal Venezuelans in Trendelargo not getting their justice, right? Not having their day in court. Well, what about people like me and other people, Tulsi Gabbard? We're just put on a terrorist watch list for no reason whatsoever. The government's going to do it, not even tell it. I didn't even know. My whole family got caught up at the airport on that.
Where do you start with this one? I mean, I mean, there's so many different angles here. The first and foremost is how the government can classify any U.S. citizen or U.S. persons as a terrorist. That's the problem that needs to be resolved.
Yeah.
A lot of this has to do with the authorities given to the government post 9/11, where basically, if they deem you a potential terrorist, they can literally flip the switch on and use the power of the state to go after you with, uh, not even using the courts to get data, like the banks, as we have found out, where literally they've tapped into banking records just by asking for it without a court order.
Yeah. Or
So just
Verizon giving them all the cell phone data for January 6th.
Yeah.
that's another one there. Yeah, all the different signals collection. So you've got just vast government power in place already that can easily be flipped on like you turn on a light switch with, any cause, and the cause could be you are deemed a terrorist threat. What could that mean? I mean, sadly, the reality is, we look at the Flynn case. They can lie against you and
Yeah.
create a crime you didn't commit, and now you
Well,
can be classified as a state
well,
terrorist.
let me
With
underscore something with the Flynn case real quick on the 302. The agents that interviewed him didn't even think he lied. They just thought he misspoke. They'd interviewed him, whatever it was, 18, 19 times. And I can't remember if it was he got a day wrong or a time wrong, where he had said something happened on a Tuesday that was a Wednesday. But even the two agents, their notes said they think he misspoke. This is, the 10th time we've interviewed the guy personally. He's had 8 other interviews or whatever it was. He just misspoke. He didn't lie to him. Their supervisor is the one that said, "Oh no, this is a lie," and then that's what they used it to ingress into the rest of everything else.
Exactly. The same thing happened to me when I had an Office of Security investigation against me, calling me a threat to the workforce.
Hmm.
I sat down with 2 threat management unit security officers. We go through all the different issues that I was trying to bring up, as far as how they were denying me a lawyer. They were stonewalling me. They weren't giving me answers as far as, well, what's going on with my reprisal claim. I'm getting nowhere. The officers basically stated, "You're not a threat. What can we do to help you?"
Hmm.
The next thing I've got is, I've got the director of security sending one of his deputies to meet with me, accusing me of being a potential leaker of classified information, of having threatened these officers, of being overly aggressive. They just cooked up a bunch of false allegations against me. And it actually escalated with more false accusations against me. So, my point is that it is very easy for rogue government actors to pick a US citizen or a US person, falsely accuse them of being a terrorist, and that turns the switch on where they can send in Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, so forth, to target you and potentially imprison you under basically false allegations.
Yeah, what's funny is the story with me. Well, not funny, but when the feds came to my house a few years after January 6th and the school board stuff, and then I'm like, oh my god, I thought I was getting arrested for January 6th. When they said it's FBI, and because a lot of people, I didn't do anything wrong. I left before people even went in. I left before they got through the last line of police officers on the west side. It wasn't until we got back to the Marriott. I'm turning on Fox News. I'm like, holy shit, Rob, there's people in the Capitol. So we left before any of that happened. So when they came to my house after the Southern Poverty Law Center, after I was labeled a domestic terrorist, after my family was quad asked, and I'm like, "Oh, no," and then, they said, "Well," I go, "What's up?" And they said, "Well, they wanted to ask about Antifa." I'm like, "Oh, great, I hate them." They're like, hate them, they hate me, I hate them. If it was anything else, I knew enough, from my old days to say, "Get the fuck out of here," but I'm like, "You're here for Antifa?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, buddies, I want to hug,"
Yeah, come
because
right in.
and then, they go, like, "Yeah, come in," and they go, "Oh, by the way, we know you were at January 6th." And I got it on the Ring camera, you see my hands like this, and then the camera I said, "Hold on a minute." I go, "Thought you're, just about Antifa." I go, "But," I go, "If you know about, January 6th, you should know everything about me. You guys know where everybody's phones were, everything. This was over 2.5 years later." They go, "Yeah, but we had to ask you." I said, "You're not in any trouble." I'm like, "Okay, I think they're fucking tricking me." I was like thinking they're trying to do, to come in and be nice, but I hated Antifa so much. I was like rolling the dice. That's a whole different show, Pedro, about Antifa and those guys here in Chicago. I fucking hate them. They went after my job, my executives on X and all this stuff, right? And then, so we get downstairs by my bar and he goes, "I have another question for you. Are you associated with the Proud Boys?" So that's what all the Antifa guys say. When I was at January 6th, I do parents events here. They show up, they hold my poster signs, and I know about the lying in General Flynn, right? I know, like, you can't lie to him. And he goes, "So are you associated with the Proud Boys?" And I look at him, I said, "I'm not a Proud Boy." So I didn't lie, and I didn't answer his question. And I'm thinking, I knew if I lied to him, and I'm like, not that it really cared. I'm like, why should I even bother answering him, right? I mean, you're here because of Antifa. Why are you asking me again? And I answered him, and he didn't push. So I didn't lie to him. And I knew enough that you're not supposed to. When I played the dumb Columbo, I knew exactly what he was trying to do.
Well, it's quite obvious they were manipulating you. They knew you hated Antifa,
Yeah.
so they used that as the hook to get in the door
Yeah.
because you would say, "Oh yeah, sure, let's talk about Antifa."
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
they basically flipped it on you, and that's one of those deep state tactics of tyrants.
Yeah. That
They
might
will.
Yeah.
be why I got 340 pages because of that and them, right? I mean, I have no idea. So I can't wait to get my first 50. Might be dead by I get the rest of them.
Yeah, I was gonna say you'll have them all by the time you're 92.
So how are we doing on time here? So what, Pedro, last closing comments from you, sir. I'd like to hear, what do you think might come with some of this stuff? I know we talked a little bit about it, but give us some
I,
closing statements on
I mean,
The
so
next,
far, if I were to look at the entire Trump administration here, I would call Tulsi Gabbard the rock star. Quietly doing her job and delivering, rather than being in front of the cameras making empty promises like "let's not name the name," because then you get her put on the bad mega list. Uh, but anyways, that's the way it's supposed to work. You're supposed to go in, you know, you don't overpromise and you overdeliver. Uh, Rock
yeah,
star.
under
Keep it up.
promise and over deliver. It's always the key to success. I've got one more question for you, and it's kind of unrelated. Well, indirectly, I guess, related to what we've been talking about, but the Epstein case. Do you think we'll actually see any arrests or prosecutions there? I mean, I wasn't too hopeful a couple of weeks ago, but now they're talking to Maxwell and apparently bringing in a couple of the other victims to talk to the DOJ next week. I'm a little more hopeful. Any insight there, or any even just any thoughts?
I
opinion.
mean, if we can ever get some of the grand jury material, we may have more indications what could be done. The reality is, for the most part, for these criminal prosecutions, they look just for enough to bring before a grand jury to issue an indictment that's going to make it through the court process for a basically, successful prosecution. Uh, so there's probably a lot of material, a lot of evidence that was never completely investigated and uncovered. And we're talking about potentially years, decades. So it's a tough one. Uh, at this stage, it's quite obvious to me that the Trump administration is going to try to push this and wait this out, and hopefully it just goes away.
Yeah.
Why?
I'll tell you. I'll tell
It's
you
a
why.
mistake because
I'll
they
tell you
made
why.
promises.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'm not going to say a very senior Republican buddy of mine, and probably would be considered more of the Rhino side. Been in politics for a long time. I trust and respect them. So I'm like, what the hell with this stuff like the 180 on Epstein's when Bondi came out? Everyone's all excited. It's like, what the right? What the hell's going on? And so the way he explained it to me is that we have all these bad people that were tied into Epstein's Island, right? And the list and stuff, right? That people were really participating in bad things, right? So you have a whole group of these billionaires that are guilty or in some fashion knew what was going on, maybe not guilty of participating, but they had knowledge. Then
Yeah.
on the other side, you got this big group of other billionaires that at the time would go to his island, didn't know, or you know what I mean, or just participated with the social aspect of who he is and stuff. So you're getting hounded by the wealthy billionaires, England, what's his name from England, all these even guilty guys. Then now you got these innocent people are like, oh come on, Trump, man, if they expose us, I didn't do anything wrong, but you know what? I'm guilt by association. So you're being hit from both sides, his friends and his enemies, his guilty friends or whatever, and they're both saying, and then he's probably like stuck in his position. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just explaining what I was told by somebody, and it does kind of make sense.
Yeah, he's getting the squeeze from both sides. And I'd believe that. Now, it does seem like there's got to be enough evidence for at least some arrests, some people, that flew to the island, say 28 times, or however many times somebody whose name rhymes with Gil Bates might have flown back and forth to pedophile island. I think if you can go after some of these big names, or only release information from people that went to the island that weren't just involved in other transactions. I brought this up on multiple programs because we don't want something to happen like what happened to the landscaper or gardening company or whatever it was that was maintaining his property in Florida. The guy had no idea who he was. He got the job through a property manager, but it basically wrecked his business because during the first prosecution. Some names came out of other people that were affiliated or worked for him or whatever, and apparently this guy's business was one of them, and it basically just wrecked his life. So we don't want anything like that to happen. Anybody that's innocent, that knew him through ancillary connections, or maybe even somebody that was just an investor when he was still tied up with the hedge funds when he worked for blanked on the company, but after he taught at the exclusive, the Dalton School, went from there to being a hedge fund manager magically. But I think the bigger thing is people want to know is, was he tied to intelligence agencies? Was this something that he was doing for the CIA or Mossad or MI6 or whoever else, and what the real story is there? And we want to ensure this isn't happening again, that we aren't exploiting people or putting them in situations and either framing them for crimes or whatever, that there isn't a blackmail ring going on that we're still participating in to control political outcomes. Because when you see some of this insane stuff, like there was a story this morning that they just refunded the National Endowment for Democracy, despite finding all this corruption and cutting off the funding previously. Now all of a sudden they're going to get their money back. And it makes you wonder, what is it behind the scene that makes that happen? Because there is zero case where that is in the Republicans' best interest to give them their $350 billion a year back. But for some reason today they did it, and it was all out of the blue.
Yeah, let's come back in 60 years. It took the CIA 60 years to release the connection with Lee Harvey Oswald. So if there's any connection to intelligence for Epstein, good luck. That's a tough one, but right on the mark. We've got to make sure that individuals that have no nefarious link to Maxwell and so forth are penalized for it. As far as Republicans, you named it, they are just they in my opinion, the Republican Party, the Republicans in Congress are probably our biggest problem.
Yes,
I agree.
They do things that absolutely, it's just mind-boggling how they come to some of these conclusions as far as the bills, the funding, the lack of oversight over these government agencies, and all the political theater, grandstanding, and showmanship that comes out of Congress.
They're pussies. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah.
They really are.
They stab us in the back every chance they get. I can at least respect. I don't agree with Nancy Pelosi or AOC or a lot of these wingnuts on the left, but at least when they stab me, it's in the front. It's in the light of day. They're not walking up behind me when I don't expect it and then ruining everything we worked on for the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they tell you what they're going to do and they go out and they do it. The Republicans tell you what they're going to do. They go out and they don't do it. And they do something
else. It's infuriating. Oh my God. But thank you. I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. To our audience, please like, share, and subscribe. Help us to grow so we can bring more people the news the mainstream media doesn't want you to hear. And we'll be back on Thursday with even more.
Yeah, we have John Millis on Thursday.